Under the quiet weight of ordinary moments, your character is being shaped. Not in grand speeches, not in heroic sacrifices, but in choices so small they often escape your notice. Socrates would pause here and smile gently, because truth rarely announces itself with noise. Confucius would nod, knowing that harmony begins where attention is disciplined. What you do when no one applauds you is already teaching the world how to treat itself. Look closely at your day, the way you speak when irritation knocks at your patience, the honesty you preserve when a lie would be easier, the respect you offer when power tempts you to dismiss another soul. These are not minor actions, they are the hidden laws governing the architecture of your life. Socrates believed that an unexamined existence collapses inward, not because of fate, but because neglect weakens the moral spine. Confucius taught that disorder in society is born first from disorder within the individual. Both voices meet here, quietly asking you to become precise with your conduct. You may think morality belongs to temples, books, or history, yet it actually lives in your tone of voice, in your restraint, in your willingness to act justly without reward. Each ethical decision leaves a trace, not dramatic, not immediate, but persistent. Like water shaping stone, repetition turns intention into destiny. Socrates warned that wrongdoing damages the soul more deeply than punishment ever could. Confucius reminded his students that virtue is contagious. When one person walks upright, others unconsciously adjust their steps. There is a reason calm discipline has outlived empires. Small acts of fairness create trust. Small acts of patience dissolve conflict. Small acts of integrity build inner strength that cannot be taken from you. When you choose what is right over what is convenient, you are not merely behaving well, you are training your perception. You begin to see clearly. You recognize what truly matters. This clarity becomes your quiet authority. Do not underestimate the silent power of consistency. A single kind gesture may fade from memory, yet a pattern of kindness becomes reputation. A single honest response may seem insignificant, yet repeated truthfulness forms a character that others rely upon. Confucius described the noble person as someone who aligns action with principle even when the road is lonely. Socrates accepted death rather than abandon justice, not because he sought martyrdom, but because coherence between thought and action mattered more than survival. Your life does not transform through sudden awakening. It evolves through alignment. When your inner values match your outward behavior, tension dissolves. You move with steadiness. Anxiety lessens because you are no longer negotiating with your conscience. This is the freedom both philosophers hinted at, not escape from responsibility, but mastery of oneself. Every interaction becomes a training ground. When you listen fully, you cultivate respect. When you respond thoughtfully, you cultivate wisdom. When you restrain harmful impulses, you cultivate strength. Society does not improve through slogans. It improves through individuals who refuse to compromise their principles in trivial moments. Confucius called this ritual, not as empty tradition, but as disciplined behavior that preserves dignity. Socrates called it virtue, the health of the soul. You are always teaching, even in silence. Your habits instruct your children, your peers, your community. When you correct yourself instead of blaming others, you introduce justice. When you admit ignorance instead of pretending certainty, you introduce humility. These lessons ripple outward in ways you will never fully see, yet they endure. This is not about perfection. Both sages understood human weakness. This is about direction. Each ethical choice is a vote for the person you are becoming. Each careless act is also a vote, though quieter, though more destructive. The law of everyday morality is simple, yet demanding. Live as though your actions matter, because they do. Stay with this thought. Let it settle. In the next moment you will be tested in a subtle way. That test is not an interruption of your life, it is your life. And in meeting it with awareness, you step into a lineage of wisdom older than time itself. From the moment you rise each morning, you are already standing inside a moral landscape. Before decisions become visible, before words are spoken, intention has taken shape within you. Confucius described this as rectifying the heart, because without inner order, external behavior loses balance. Socrates would challenge you here, urging you to inspect what moves you before the world pulls you in its direction. This silent preparation determines whether you react blindly or act with purpose. Consider how often life invites you to cut corners, a promise delayed, a truth softened to protect comfort, a responsibility shifted onto another. None of these moments announce themselves as ethical crossroads, yet each one quietly defines your integrity. Socrates believed ignorance was the root of wrongdoing, not because people lack information, but because they refuse to reflect. When reflection disappears, habit takes control. Confucius warned that when habit rules without virtue, harmony dissolves into chaos. Your power does not lie in controlling outcomes. It lives in governing responses. When frustration arises, you can fuel it or dissolve it. When temptation appears, you can follow it or observe it pass. This capacity to pause is the birthplace of morality. It is where wisdom becomes practical. A restrained impulse may seem invisible to others, yet it strengthens your inner command. Over time, this command becomes calm confidence. Society mirrors the average behavior of its individuals. When courtesy fades, trust erodes. When sincerity weakens, relationships become transactional. Confucius emphasized social responsibility not as obligation, but as refinement. Treating others with respect was not about their status, but about preserving one's own character. Socrates echoed this by teaching that injustice harms the doer more than the victim, because it fractures the soul. Think of the smallest role you play today: a listener, a worker, a neighbor, a stranger passing through another life for only seconds. In each role, you either elevate or diminish the shared space, the way you wait in line, the way you disagree, the way you acknowledge another person's presence. These gestures shape the moral climate around you. They may never be recorded, yet they are felt. There is discipline in choosing gentleness when sharpness would dominate. There is courage in choosing fairness when advantage whispers. These choices do not weaken you. They stabilize you. Confucius described virtue as something that stands firm under pressure, like a well-rooted tree. Socrates would say that stability comes from knowing what is worth defending and refusing to betray it. You are not asked to be flawless. You are asked to be awake. Awareness transforms routine into responsibility. It turns repetition into training. Every day becomes a workshop where character is refined, not through grand gestures, but through steady attention to what is right. When you stumble, reflection restores direction. When you succeed quietly, humility preserves balance. Ethical living is not heavy. It becomes heavy only when ignored. Once embraced, it simplifies your path. You stop calculating appearances. You stop justifying contradictions. Your actions begin to flow from a unified center. This unity is what both philosophers pointed toward, a life where thought, word, and deed move together. Carry this understanding forward. The next interaction, the next decision, the next pause before action is another opportunity to practice the law of everyday morality. Nothing dramatic is required, only presence, restraint, and sincerity. In these, a strong life is built. When silence fills the space between one action and the next, that is where your true discipline is revealed, not in what you declare, but in what you choose before the world demands an explanation. Socrates treated these pauses as sacred, moments where reason must guide impulse. Confucius viewed them as the measure of cultivation, proof that a person had learned to govern themselves before attempting to influence others. Notice how quickly judgment appears, toward people, toward situations, toward yourself. Most moral failure does not begin with cruelty, it begins with haste, a rushed conclusion, a careless assumption, an unchecked reaction. Socrates insisted that wisdom starts with admitting how little we truly know. Confucius insisted that restraint preserves harmony. Together, they warn you that speed without reflection creates damage long before intention catches up. Your inner dialogue matters more than your public behavior. The way you excuse small wrongs trains you to tolerate larger ones. The way you justify disrespect dulls your sense of justice. These conversations within you shape the boundaries of your character. When you challenge your own reasoning, you sharpen it. When you question your motives, you cleanse them. This is not self-criticism, it is self-respect. Everyday morality asks for steadiness, not perfection. You will feel anger, you will feel envy, you will feel fear. Virtue does not demand their absence, it demands your leadership over them. Confucius spoke of balance, the ability to hold emotion without letting it rule. Socrates spoke of mastery, the refusal to let desire dethrone reason. Both teach that freedom is internal before it is external. Look at how influence truly works. People rarely follow instructions, but they instinctively follow examples. When your behavior is aligned, others feel it without being told. Calm spreads. Fairness invites trust. Integrity lowers defenses. This is how society heals, not through force, but through imitation of quiet strength. One steady person in a room can change the entire atmosphere. You may wonder whether such small efforts matter in a world that rewards noise and aggression. They matter precisely because of that noise. Moral clarity cuts through confusion. Consistency outlasts trends. Confucius believed that when leadership is virtuous, correction becomes unnecessary. Socrates believed that truth needs no decoration, only courage to live by it. The discipline you practice in private becomes stability in public. When you keep your word even when inconvenient, you reinforce reliability. When you treat others fairly, even when unseen, you reinforce justice. These repetitions shape your identity. Over time, they become effortless, not because they are easy, but because they are natural to who you have chosen to become. Do not wait for extraordinary circumstances to test your ethics. The test is already here, disguised as routine, in how you respond to inconvenience, in how you speak when tired, in how you act when advantage presents itself. Each moment asks a quiet question. Will you act from impulse or from principle? Hold this awareness as you move forward. The law of everyday morality does not demand applause, it demands presence. And in that presence, a resilient life is formed, step by deliberate step. Beneath the surface of ordinary behavior lies a structure you are constantly building. Every reaction adds a brick. Every decision reinforces or weakens the foundation. Confucius spoke of this as cultivation, the slow shaping of a person through deliberate conduct. Socrates approached it as alignment, ensuring that actions never drift far from reason. Neither promised speed, both promised endurance. Reflect on how power appears in daily life. Not authority, not dominance, but the subtle influence of choice. You possess power when you refuse to mirror disrespect. You exercise power when you respond with composure instead of retaliation. This form of strength is rarely praised, yet it is the one that lasts. Socrates argued that self-control is the highest form of rule. Confucius taught that those who govern themselves inspire others without command. The world often tempts you to believe that small compromises are harmless, a slight exaggeration, a convenient silence, a deferred responsibility. Yet morality erodes not through collapse, but through erosion. When these habits repeat, they normalize disorder within you. Once disorder becomes familiar, clarity fades. This is why both philosophers emphasized vigilance, not suspicion of others, but attentiveness toward oneself. There is quiet dignity in doing what is right without witnesses. No applause sharpens your focus. No reward distracts your intention. In these moments, your character stands alone. Confucius believed this was the mark of the refined person, someone whose conduct remains upright even in isol. Socrates demonstrated this principle by living consistently, regardless of approval or threat. Think about how trust is formed. It is not built through promises, but through patterns. When your words and actions agree, reliability grows. When they diverge, confidence weakens. Others sense this instinctively. Over time, your presence either calms or unsettles those around you. This effect is not accidental. It is the result of accumulated ethical choices. Moral discipline also brings clarity to your priorities. When principles guide you, decisions simplify. You no longer chase every opportunity. You choose what aligns with your values. Confucius described this as knowing one's place. Socrates described it as knowing oneself. Both lead to the same outcome, a life directed rather than scattered. Even mistakes serve a purpose when met with honesty. Reflection turns error into instruction. Denial turns it into repetition. Socrates encouraged relentless questioning, not to shame, but to awaken understanding. Confucius encouraged correction, not to punish, but to restore harmony. Growth begins the moment you accept responsibility without resentment. Everyday morality is not restrictive. It is liberating. It frees you from internal conflict. It releases you from the exhaustion of pretense. When your behavior reflects your values, energy returns. You move through life with steadiness, not urgency. This steadiness becomes your quiet signature. As you continue listening, remember this: greatness is not an event waiting in the future. It is a direction practiced now. In the next interaction, the next response, the next silent decision, you will again choose what kind of life you are shaping. When attention drifts, conduct weakens. This is why both Socrates and Confucius treated awareness as a daily discipline, not an occasional exercise. A distracted mind behaves with out-direction. A present mind chooses with intention. You are not shaped by rare moments of insight, but by the quality of awareness you bring to what repeats every day. Observe how easily moral fatigue appears. After a long day, patience thins. After repeated effort, standards soften. This is where everyday morality is truly tested, not when you feel inspired, but when you feel depleted. Confucius understood this and emphasized ritual, structured behavior that protects virtue when emotion falters. Socrates relied on reason, returning again and again to inquiry so that exhaustion would not excuse injustice. Your reactions under pressure reveal more than your ideals in comfort. When tired, do you still speak with fairness? When stressed, do you still act with restraint? These moments do not condemn you, they instruct you. They show where discipline must be strengthened. Moral growth is not about suppressing weakness, but about recognizing patterns and refining them. Consider the effect of consistency on the mind. When you act according to principle repeatedly, resistance fades. What once required effort becomes natural. Integrity turns into instinct. Confucius believed that virtue, practiced long enough, becomes effortless grace. Socrates believed that knowledge of the good, once internalized, guides action without force. Both point to the same truth: repetition shapes identity. There is also courage in refusing to participate in subtle wrongs, gossip disguised as bonding, silence disguised as neutrality, convenience disguised as necessity. These are the soft pressures of daily life. Resisting them does not make you loud or confrontational, it makes you steady. This steadiness is rare, and because it is rare, it carries weight. You influence more than you realize. Your behavior sets boundaries for what is acceptable around you. When you refuse to cut ethical corn, others hesitate to do so in your presence. When you maintain respect during disagreement, conflict loses its sharp edge. Confucius described this as moral gravity, the ability of virtue to draw order toward itself. Socrates demonstrated it by remaining composed even when misunderstood. Everyday morality also sharpens perception. You begin to notice subtleties others overlook. The difference between honesty and bluntness, the difference between humility and self-erasure, the difference between firmness and cruelty. These distinctions matter. Without them, good intentions can still cause harm. With them, even simple actions carry wisdom. There will be moments when ethical behavior feels unrewarded, when fairness costs you advantage, when restraint costs you recognition. In those moments, remember that morality is not a transaction. It is an investment in the coherence of your life. Socrates accepted loss because preserving the soul mattered more than preserving comfort. Confucius accepted obscurity because harmony mattered more than status. You are not building a reputation alone. You are building inner trust. When you know you will act rightly regardless of circumstance, anxiety loosens its grip. You stop fearing exposure because there is nothing to hide. This internal security is one of the greatest rewards of disciplined living, though it is rarely spoken about. As this reflection continues, let it recalibrate your sense of success. Measure progress not by applause, but by alignment, not by speed, but by steadiness. In this quiet recalibration, the law of everyday morality becomes not a burden, but a guide. Long before societies collapse, attention collapses within individuals. Confucius observed this pattern carefully. Disorder in families, corruption in leadership, cruelty in institutions, none of it appears suddenly. It begins when people stop caring the weight of small actions. Socrates reached the same conclusion from a different path. When people abandon self-examination, they surrender their freedom without noticing. You live inside a chain of cause and effect that rarely announces itself. A careless word weakens trust. Weakened trust hardens hearts. Hardened hearts justify harm. What looks insignificant at the beginning becomes destructive at the end. Everyday morality interrupts this chain early, when correction is still gentle, when damage is still reversible. This is why wisdom insists on vigilance in the smallest things. There is a deep form of respect that has nothing to do with politeness. It is the respect of recognizing another person as a moral equal. Confucius taught that proper conduct preserves this recognition. Socrates practiced it by questioning everyone, not to humiliate, but to honor their capacity for reason. When you treat people with dignity, even in disagreement, you protect something larger than the moment. You protect the social fabric itself. Your moral life is not separate from your emotional life. When you act against your values, tension accumulates. Guilt becomes noise. Justification becomes habit. Over time, this inner conflict exhausts you. Stoic calm does not come from emotional numbness. It comes from congruence. When what you believe matches what you do, the mind rests. This rest is strength. Notice how resentment forms. It grows when you believe the world owes you fairness while you quietly abandon fairness yourself. Socrates warned against this hypocrisy, arguing that injustice damages the soul regardless of who commits it. Confucius warned that resentment poisons harmony from within. Both saw bitterness as a sign of misalignment, not bad luck. Ethical discipline also trains patience with imperfection, your own and others. You begin to correct without cruelty. You learn to wait without bitterness. You guide without domination. This maturity does not arise from age, but from reflection. Many grow older without growing wiser because they never pause to ask why they act as they do. Consider how leadership truly emerges. It does not announce itself. It is recognized. People gravitate toward those whose behavior is predictable in the best sense, fair, measured, principled. Confucius called this moral authority. Socrates embodied it by remaining calm even when condemned. Neither relied on force. Their influence came from coherence. You may feel alone in choosing restraint where others choose excess. That solitude is not emptiness, it is space. Space to think clearly, space to act deliberately, space to avoid being swept into patterns you did not choose. Stoic strength grows in this space, where you decide rather than react. There is also humility in accepting limits. You cannot correct everyone. You cannot prevent every wrong. What you can do is refuse to add to the disorder. This refusal matters. It stabilizes you. It anchors you. Confucius believed that when one person stands firm, chaos loses momentum. Socrates believed that living justly was sufficient, even if the world remained unjust. As this journey continues, let your focus narrow rather than expand. Bring your attention back to the next choice, the next response, the next moment of restraint. History is shaped by these moments, though it rarely records them. Your life, however, records every one. At some point you begin to notice a shift, not outside you, but within. Situations that once pulled you into reaction now meet resistance. Words that once escaped without thought now wait for permission. This is not suppression. This is maturity. Confucius described this stage as refinement, when a person no longer struggles against virtue because virtue has become familiar. Socrates would call it inner order, the mind no longer at war with itself. Everyday morality quietly reshapes your relationship with desire. Wanting does not disappear, but it loses authority. You stop obeying every impulse simply because it speaks loudly. You begin to distinguish between what pleases you momentarily and what strengthens you over time. This distinction is crucial. Without it, life becomes reactive. With it, life becomes intentional. Notice how dignity forms, not as pride, not as superiority, but as self-respect. When you refuse to act against your values, you stand taller internally, even if no one sees it. Confucius believed dignity came from proper conduct, not status. Socrates believed it came from loyalty to reason. Both understood that self-betrayal is the deepest humiliation, even when disguised as success. There is also a quiet joy in moral steadiness. Not excitement, not pleasure, but a deep sense of rightness. This joy does not depend on outcomes. It arises from knowing that you acted correctly regardless of consequence. Stoic calm grows from this soil. When external results no longer dictate your peace, freedom begins. Consider how conflict changes when you are anchored. Disagreement no longer feels like threat. Criticism no longer feels like attack. You listen more carefully, you respond more precisely, you correct without hostility. This does not make you passive, it makes you effective. Confucius taught that harmony does not mean agreement, it means balance. Socrates taught that truth emerges through dialogue, not domination. Your presence starts to carry weight. People sense when you are not performing, not manipulating, not hiding. This authenticity disarms tension. It invites honesty. Even those who disagree with you feel safer speaking openly. This is a rare quality, born not from charisma, but from consistency, moral clarity. So simplifies regret. When mistakes occur, you face them directly. No elaborate defenses, no prolonged denial. Correction becomes swift. Learning becomes possible. Socrates believed that recognizing error was the beginning of wisdom. Confucius believed that correction restored order. Neither saw shame as useful when responsibility was taken sincerely. As this discipline deepens, time itself feels different. You stop rushing toward validation. You stop measuring your worth through comparison. You invest energy where it aligns with your principles. This patience is not laziness, it is precision. You choose carefully because you know what it costs to choose poorly. There will still be moments of doubt. Ethical living does not remove uncertainty. It teaches you how to stand within it. When answers are unclear, principles guide you. When emotions conflict, values stabilize you. This stability becomes your compass when external signals contradict one another. You are not becoming rigid, you are becoming rooted. Flexibility remains, but it grows from strength rather than confusion. Confucius admired those who adapted without losing form. Socrates admired those who questioned without losing direction. In this balance, wisdom lives. Let this understanding settle into you, not as a theory but as a posture toward life. The law of everyday morality does not demand constant effort forever. Over time, it becomes your natural way of being. Slowly, you begin to understand that morality is not something you carry, it is something you inhabit. It becomes the atmosphere of your life, rather than a rulebook you consult. Confucius hinted at this when he spoke of living in accordance with the way, where conduct flows naturally from inner alignment. Socrates lived it by refusing to separate wisdom from daily behavior. For both, ethics was not performance, it was residence. At this stag, the noise of external pressure loses its dominance. Praise feels lighter. Criticism feels less threatening. You no longer adjust yourself to win approval because your direction is no longer negotiable. This does not harden you, it clarifies you. When your values are settled, you stop drifting. You stop reacting to every current that passes. You also begin to sense consequences earlier, not through fear but through perception, Before a careless remark leaves your mouth, you feel its weight. Before an unfair action takes shape, you sense its cost. This sensitivity is not anxiety, it is refinement. Confucius would call it awareness of propriety. Socrates would call it foresight born of reason. Both saw it as a sign of growth. Everyday morality reshapes ambition as well. You still strive, but differently. Achievement no longer excuses harm. Success no longer justifies erosion of character. You measure progress not only by what you gain, but by what you preserve. Peace, trust, self-respect, these become non-negotiable. In this way, ambition becomes disciplined rather than destructive. There is a particular strength that emerges when you stop needing to be right and start needing to be just. Conversations soften, listening deepens. You no longer enter dialogue to win, but to understand. Socrates practiced this relentlessly, asking questions not to dominate, but to uncover truth. Confucius valued this humility because it prevented knowledge from becoming arrogance. Your relationship with time also matures. Urgency loosens. You are less tempted to force outcomes. You recognize that ethical impact unfolds gradually. A single act may seem invisible, yet its repetition builds something unmovable. This patience allows you to endure moments when results lag behind effort. You are no longer rushed by the illusion that everything must happen now. There is also a quiet seeper, ration that occurs. Not isolation, but discernment. You choose your influences more carefully. You step away from environments that reward cruelty, deception, or excess. This is not judgment, it is self-preservation. Confucius advised choosing company that elevates conduct. Socrates warned that unexamined influences corrupt without announcing themselves. At times you may feel out of step with the world. That feeling is not failure, it is orientation. When the surrounding culture moves without reflection, stillness feels strange. Yet history remembers those who resisted drift, not those who blended perfectly into it. Moral steadiness often feels lonely in the present and obvious in hindsight. You also become more forgiving without becoming permissive. You understand how ignorance shapes behavior, yet you do not excuse injustice. This balance is difficult. It requires both compassion and firmness. Socrates held people accountable through questioning. Confucius held people accountable through example. Both refused to abandon standards while recognizing human limitation. As this awareness deepens, life becomes less dramatic but more meaningful. Fewer extremes, more depth, fewer reactions, more intention. You are no longer pulled apart by contradiction. You move as one piece. This coherence is rare, and because it is rare, it is powerful. Let this phase of understanding ground you, not as an endpoint but as a continuation. The law of everyday morality does not conclude, it matures. And with that maturity, your life gains a quiet authority that no external force can grant or remove. Even in ordinary encounters, influence accumulates. Every choice to act rightly, even when unnoticed, leaves an imprint. Socrates reminded us that injustice harms the doer more than the victim, because every act shapes the soul. Confucius added that propriety, when practiced consistently, strengthens both the individual and the society they inhabit. Each small ethical gesture becomes a thread weaving an unseen, enduring pattern. Notice the subtle power of restraint. You do not need to dominate arguments, seek attention, or force recognition. By choosing patience, honesty, and respect, you set a standard silently, yet unmistakably. Others sense it, communities absorb it, the world changes in incremental waves, not sudden tides. The law of everyday morality is slow but persistent. Reflection deepens this process. After each decision, each interaction, take a moment to examine your intent. Were you honest, compassionate, courageous? Socrates would insist on questioning yourself without leniency or evasion. Confucius would insist on correcting without pride or blame. This cycle of action and reflection polishes character over time, revealing patterns you would otherwise miss. Your moral framework also stabilizes emotion. When provoked, you respond rather than react. When confronted with dishonesty, you maintain clarity. When tempted by convenience, you choose principle. This is not rigidity but harmony, a melody between reason and impulse. Stoic calm emerges not from suppression, but from disciplined engagement. Understand that impact is often invisible. A single act of fairness may never be remembered. A kind word may vanish like smoke, yet their accumulation forms an ethical gravity that guides your life and subtly reshapes your environment. Confucius emphasized that even quiet virtue radiates influence. Socrates demonstrated it by living truthfully, leaving a legacy far larger than any immediate effect. Consistency is key. Small lapses compound as much as small virtues. One unexamined choice can start erosion. One practiced virtue strengthens for years. Therefore, treat each action as meaningful. Treat each interaction as a chance to reinforce integrity. This disciplined attention transforms ordinary moments into enduring achievements. There is also courage in the mundane. It is easy to act rightly when all is convenient. It is harder when discomfort, fatigue, or social pressure suggest otherwise. Yet these are the precise moments where moral habits are forged. Confucius praised the steadfast who maintained propriety against adversity. Socrates accepted suffering rather than violate principle. Your courage is measured similarly in daily, repeated choices. Even self-perception shifts. You begin to see yourself not merely as reacting to life, but as shaping it. Every action reflects your understanding of virtue. Every decision aligns with the character you aspire to inhabit. This alignment reduces internal conflict, freeing energy previously spent in negotiation with your own conscience. Finally, remember that morality is relational. Your life affects others in ways you will never quantify. A patient gesture may ease a burden. A just decision may inspire trust. A simple act of honesty may spark reflection in another. The law of everyday morality works quietly but continuously, shaping not just your character, but the living fabric of your world. Every day offers a canvas, and each action, no matter how small, paints a stroke on the moral picture of your life. Confucius emphasized that harmony begins in the individual before it spreads to family, community, and society. Socrates affirmed that the health of the soul matters more than any fleeting external success. Your life, then, is a laboratory of virtue, every decision an experiment in integrity. Notice how discipline feels now. You do not wait for inspiration or circumstance to dictate morality. You act from principle steadily, consistently. When you speak, your words carry the weight of reflection. When you act, your deeds echo the coherence of your values. Stoic calm arises naturally from this alignment. You are no longer scattered by impulse, nor lost to indecision. Impact unfolds quietly but relentlessly. The cumulative effect of small ethical acts shapes not just your future, but the environment you inhabit. A single moment of fairness may ripple through time. A repeated habit of kindness builds networks of trust that survive long after you forget them. Confucius called this moral resonance. Socrates called it the cultivation of the soul. Both understood the invisible power of disciplined, repeated choice. Even temptation becomes a teacher. When you feel the pull toward convenience over principle, you confront your character directly. Choosing restraint strengthens self-command. Choosing honesty deepens wisdom. Each test, though subtle, confirms your capacity to live deliberately rather than drift passively. This is the essence of the law of everyday morality, constant, unobtrusive, transformative. Reflection sharpens discernment. You begin to distinguish between what merely satisfies and what sustains. You recognize subtle injustices in yourself and others. You notice the difference between generosity and performative giving, between courage and empty bravado. These distinctions matter because they determine whether your ethical life is real or performative. Confucius prized sincerity, Socrates prized reasoned truth. Both demand vigilance in the small habitual choices. Patience becomes a companion. You understand that ethical impact is rarely immediate. Trust builds slowly. Respect deepens gradually. Reputation forms quietly. Your influence grows not through spectacle, but through steadfast presence. The ordinary becomes extraordinary when consistently aligned with virtue. You also embrace humility. You do not need recognition. You do not need applause. Ethical living is its own reward. Socrates demonstrated this by prioritizing justice over survival. Confucius demonstrated this by valuing propriety over status. Their lives remind you that integrity matters far more than acknowledgement. Even in mistakes, opportunity exists. When you act poorly, reflection restores direction. When others falter, compassion tempers judgment. Growth is continuous, measured not by absence of error, but by persistent effort toward alignment. Each correction strengthens moral gravity, drawing future actions toward integrity. Finally, recognize the legacy of small ethical acts. They ripple beyond immediate perception, affecting people, communities, and generations. Life measured this way is quiet but profound. It is resilience over spectacle, wisdom over convenience, and virtue over expedience. Your practice of everyday morality shapes a life that matters, not through grand gestures, but through persistent, conscientious living. Walk forward with this awareness. Let each action, each word, each pause be deliberate. The law of everyday morality is not theoretical, it is lived, moment by moment, shaping you and the world around you in ways both seen and unseen.